Hi, I'm Mark Coopersmith,
I'm John Danner. Welcome.
and this is the beginning of season two of the Other F Word podcast, based on our book, The Other F Word: How Smart Leaders, Teams, and Entrepreneurs Put Failure to Work. And in this season, we want to pull forward a key element of learning from failure and the other F word that's really at the core, that's embedded in this topic. And that's the topic of resilience. John?
Resilience is really, in some ways, the acid test of how you deal with failure. We're all fallible. All of our organizations are fallible. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to screw up. The issue is, what do we do with it? Because resilience doesn't happen in the absence of adversity. It happens when adversity presents itself and also when opportunity presents itself. Can you pivot? Can you change? Are you flexible enough and maybe even humble enough to acknowledge that things maybe are not turning out the way you thought they would?
One of the examples that we used in our book was Netflix, and how Netflix obviously was established because of a broken business model with the blockbusters of the world. And partway into their existence, how they almost killed themselves with the introduction of Quickster, which was splitting the service into a DVD by mail and an online service. Well, they recovered from that. Look for it in the book, and you can see exactly what they did. And that was 8 or 9 years ago. So now Netflix is dealing with potentially another existential threat to their business as subscriber growth not only slows but turns negative, as competition has changed, and as the entire model of streaming media is being disrupted yet again.
And as password abusers are finally caught.
Yeah, that's true. Now, I'm not saying that that ever happened in our households with our children, but
No.
those passwords were shared relatively broadly. Good point. So the interesting thing, and we won't talk about Netflix beyond this, but to use it as an example, is here's a company that has shown itself to learn from failure, to be resilient. First, in the way it was how it established itself. Second, how it almost killed itself with the Quickster debacle. And then how it became an absolute juggernaut when it comes to streaming, but now it's under siege yet again. How do they respond? We're going to be following that and others through season two.
So, Mark, what's your example this week?
Well, so this week I thought that I would use an example to both kind of establish to anchor where we've come from, and then to establish something going forward. And my example is Ernst and Young, or EY as they're now called. And there are two elements. The first, which happened about a month ago, was EY came out and agreed to pay $100 million fine. $100 million. Why? Because a number of their professionals were caught cheating on an exam. Now, these were auditors, right? And what do auditors do? The job of auditors is to keep people from cheating, right? So there's something there. But John, and you know the punchline on this. What was the exam? What portion of the CPA exam were they caught cheating on?
The ethics
The
part.
ethics portion. I mean, how perfect is that from the standpoint of unclear on the concept? $100 million fine, and this happened over several years, actually, this cheating, and a recognition that they needed to do better as
And
they
a
move forward.
brand tarnishing event, self-imposed completely.
Ultimately, the thing that's fascinating is as we look at this whole area around audit, think back to Anderson Consulting, and then they'd spun off Accenture and the Enron debacle that ultimately sunk the entire firm. So these are things that revisit themselves again and again, and really calls for this component of resilience, and how do you become resilient, and in these regards, not just how do you recover from them, but how do you avoid some of those elements in the first place. Now, I have a part two on this story, but John, let's go. Why don't you kick us off on the resilience component, and I'll come back to part two with E&Y.
So let me go to, pardon the pun, another field altogether. And Talk about for a second one of the true legendary dynasties in all of professional sports, and it's the All Blacks rugby team from New Zealand. Books have been written about this organization and the culture that they've created, the incredible winning percentage, the pride that that country has in the All Blacks team. In fact, part of the mission of All Blacks is to inspire and unite New Zealand. I mean, just imagine that for a moment. So this is an organization that has had really an unparalleled record of success until recently. This season, for example, they've already been beaten 3 times by 3 other global powerhouses in rugby. And there's a real question going on now about whether the institution, the culture, the strategy, the approach that is built All Blacks into the legacy operation that it is going to be able to sustain, or whether or not they're going to be able to adapt and revise themselves,
Do we have any
redefine their
insights?
strategy, their playing strategy, how they recruit their players, how they coach, and what the culture is going to stand for going forward. They're up against some significant underlying problems. One of which, just to give you an example, is that now more kids are playing basketball in New Zealand than are playing rugby. So the talent pipeline is changing. Other teams have gotten smarter about how to adapt to All Black strategy, and they're beating them in some ways with new strategies and new approaches on the field. So it's a field, it's an example in athletics that is an ongoing question as to whether they're going to be resilient enough to retain and get back their lauded status.
Well, maybe they should spend a little more time with some of our colleagues at UC Berkeley. We actually have a pretty good rugby program there. More
We
than
do.
more than 20 national championships in the last 30 years. So maybe there's some resilience from Berkeley to New Zealand. And for those of you who haven't seen it, the chant, the Maori chant that the All Blacks perform at the beginning of every match is really something,
We
right?
should have worn black shirts today.
Yeah, we should have or could have, right? But we're not ready to mourn them just yet. So coming back to Ernst and Young on mine, or EY, one of the other things that EY has been in the news for recently is a potential split up of its consulting versus audit division. And this is something that we've seen other financial advisory firms do in years past. And most of the time they haven't worked terribly well. Now, we referenced earlier how Arthur Andersen, destroyed itself due to Enron, but spun off Accenture successfully. Now, Ernst and Young at the time did this as well about 20 years ago when they spun off their consulting arm to Capgemini. And at the time, it turned out not to be a terribly good outcome for the audit or the accounting partners that were involved. The question is, as they look to spin off their consulting from their audit business now, will they learn from what didn't work last time? Will they go ahead and address some of the overhanging issues, including a lot of debt or a lot of unfunded pension obligations, as we kind of peel the onion on this one, to be successful? So from a resilience standpoint, this has happened before and it hasn't worked out terribly well. Will they do the right things this time around to attain a better outcome? Now, this is in process, and we may revisit this during this coming season 2 of The Other F Word.
So we'll leave you with both an invitation and a challenge. The invitation is, if you have some stories that you'd like us to chat about or comment on, by all means, send us a note, and we'd be happy to do that if we have time. Secondly, the challenge. And the challenge is, think about what are the crown jewels of your business, the things that if they were tarnished or damaged or lost in any way, your firm might not exist, or your reputation or your relationships with your key customers or investors might be jeopardized.
Wait, John, is that like credibility and integrity when it comes to auditing?
I would say, even more simply, it's about trust.
Yeah, it's about
And
trust.
what is the foundation of every firm in the audit business? It's trust.
Right.
And
Well,
that,
and
and
we've spoken about Boeing a few times. It's for me, I always like to get upgraded when I get onto a plane, but there's one thing that I really want to do, when I get onto a plane, walk onto a plane, and that's to walk off,
No
right? It's
kidding.
that trust, it's safety.
So we'll be back with you with some other examples over the course of this season. Thanks for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you again.
Bye for now.
So long.